Hello, and thank you for joining us here on the Neutral Zone. I am Phil Milani, joined as always by my trusty sidekick, my partner in crime. Really, the best way to describe this person is my everything. It's at Eric Dalala.
That's me, Phil.
That is you.
It's this guy.
Yes, it is. And, it's such a treat to be able to talk some football, some Broncos football with you, Eric, here on the Neutral Zone. And, there's never really a quiet week immediately following the end of the season for the Broncos. There's always something going on. Of course, right now, the Broncos in the midst of a GM search for the first time in really a decade here, Eric, that the Broncos are navigating these waters. And it seems like they've picked a handful of guys, very qualified guys that would do a great job if they were to come in.
Yeah, Phil, we've heard of 5 people that have, reportedly or confirmed. Joe Ellis did confirm that Champ Kelly would be among those, but 5 guys that will be among the people that the Broncos plan to interview, at least in this initial wave. And those guys, of course, Phil, Champ Kelly from the Chicago Bears, Terry Fontenot from the New Orleans Saints, Dave Ziegler from the New England Patriots, George Payton from the Minnesota Vikings, and then Brian Stark, of course, from the Denver Broncos. So casting a wide net here. And I think there's plenty of those guys who are very capable, very qualified, would make good GMs. So some good choices out there for Denver.
Yeah, Eric, and maybe we could go into each one of those and talk about why they might be a good fit for the Broncos. So we'll plan on doing that through this episode of the Neutral Zone. We also have a special guest joining us today, Eric. Peter King from NBC Sports will weigh in on what he thinks of this Broncos opening and maybe some of the candidates that are reportedly going to interview here with the Broncos, and maybe just talking a little bit about where the Broncos stand right now as a franchise moving forward. So make sure you stick around for that interview. Eric and I will talk about what the number one priority is for this general manager, whoever it is, when they come in. What's the first thing they need to do? We'll dive into that a little bit, and then we'll wrap up the show talking about maybe our playoff picks this weekend. Eric, it's been a while since the Broncos were still playing this week. Sometimes you forget, hey, there's still football going on right now.
Yeah, hard to believe that as we're in the midst of this GM search, Phil. Some teams were out of practice today.
Yeah,
I could have been out there tweeting who is limited, who is full. I miss those days.
Maybe with the right hire, Eric, we'll be doing that next year.
That's the hope.
We'll be doing that next year. Yeah.
Well, hopefully next year, Phil, we won't be doing it this time. We'll be on the bye.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Or actually, maybe even next year, it'll be week 17 of the regular season.
That's true. 3 more games still to go.
Yeah.
The postseason begins in March. Who knows what's going to happen?
Watch out, college basketball. There's a new rival for March.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Eric, I think that's going to be a very nice episode here. Anyone listening, you want to be a part of Neutral Zone, please call in, leave a voicemail at 707-NEUTRAL. That is the hotline. That goes straight to Eric's voicemail, and he listens to all of those. So if you'd like to be a part of the show, not just listen, but maybe we say something today that just gets you so fired up that you've got to leave a voicemail. 707-NEUTRAL is that number, and Eric will listen to it. Eric also likes to read emails too, right?
That's right, Phil. And you can send those to neutralzoneshow@gmail.com. And Phil, I will say, we got a lot of voicemails, a lot of emails in reply to our last podcast. We got to keep powering through the GM search, but we're reading them, we're listening. The Zonies will still happen for anyone who's concerned.
Yes.
Just not today.
Originally, this episode was supposed to be the Zonies, the awards that we go back and give to Broncos players from this past season. We've got a great show when that time comes, Eric. I know that you got your tuxedo pressed. It's ready to go. I might even get a haircut for the show, Eric.
Wouldn't count on it.
Yeah.
I will say, Phil, the one that I'll bring up now is somebody said that my New Year's resolution should be to be nicer to you. And so going to try to start that out today. There's already been a couple opportunities here where I would normally have taken a shot at you, but I've let them pass. I'm doing my best, and we'll see if we can make it halfway through the episode or something like that.
Don't try too hard, because then I'll miss that edginess, Eric. I like the edge.
That's true.
Yeah, that's what makes this show special. So
yeah.
You could also blast Eric directly on Twitter. It's at Eric Dalala with an A. If you have a nice comment, maybe some constructive criticism for me, it's at Phil Milani with a PH. Or if you want to just blast the show in general, leave a comment here on YouTube, and we'll read that as well. So, a lot of ways to blast.
That's right.
Eric, let's dive into this GM search here and talk about some of the reported candidates that the Broncos will be interviewing. Let's start with George Paton, Eric, because I think that maybe out of all of these guys on this list, by the way, if you want to find out who the Broncos are talking to, what's the latest information, there is a GM tracker on denverbroncos.com that I know Eric personally updates every 5 minutes. So
that's right. Nothing's set in stone, Phil. We're not chiseling out of rocks. This is a fluid situation. So we're updating as new information comes in. But like you said, Phil, George Paton was one of the earlier candidates to kind of get identified as someone who could be a good fit for this job. He's probably the most experienced, currently the VP of player personnel and the assistant GM for the Minnesota Vikings. He's been involved in a lot of those decisions, especially in the draft process the last few years. Vikings, of course, have been very successful. They just found Justin Jefferson there with the 22nd pick. He obviously set a rookie record for receiving yards for a wide receiver. And Phil, what's interesting to me is that of all these guys that we're going to talk about, Paton probably has the most experience interviewing around. He's been close to accepting some GM jobs in the past. Last year, he was linked to Cleveland. Ended up withdrawing his name from that search. But this year, we've got an article with Tom Pelissero, who, of course, he covers the Vikings, covers the league, but he just knows what's going on in Minnesota. He told me, Phil, about it's hard to find someone better respected, a better candidate for a GM than George Paton. And he seems like he thinks that Paton will take one of these. I believe there's 6 openings now, that he'll take one of those if offered. So whether in Denver or somewhere around the league, it sounds like he could be a guy somewhere.
Wow. And that would be a big loss for Minnesota any way you cut it, because he's been there for so long, since 2007, making big decisions for the Vikings. And, someone who's not afraid to make a big trade, Eric, because last year you saw the Vikings move on from Stephon Diggs. That was a big trade, ended up working out nicely for the Vikings as they got Justin Jefferson later on in the draft. We heard Vic Fangio, when I talked to him after the season was over, he said the number one thing that they're looking for in a GM is someone who can talent evaluate, a great evaluator of talent. And, I think that George Paton would definitely bring that, Eric, like you mentioned, was close to a lot of jobs last offseason. Of course, Kevin Stefanski went to Cleveland, so they thought maybe that would be a nice pairing, a couple of Minnesota guys going together there in Cleveland. And that's another thing that Fangio talked about, is that the GM and the head coach need to have a close relationship. They got to be able to work together nicely. And maybe a guy who's been in the league, been around this for a long time, in George Paton, might be able to work well with Vic Fangio, in my opinion. And, I think that when you look at teams across the NFL, I think that the Vikings are an organization that has been run well recently. They've made good talent decisions. And I think that, if you bring in a guy like George Paton, you can assume that he would continue that trend here in Denver. Now, Paton has interviewed, I think it was reported that he was interviewed with the Detroit Lions already. And we know that there's a lot of jobs out there. So, Eric, I do think that George Paton is probably pretty high on the Broncos list.
Yeah, and in high demand across the league, as I think a few of these guys that we'll mention are. Champ Kelly's another one of those guys. So we'll have to see, Phil. And when these dominoes start to fall across the league, they start to fall quickly. So it could be very possible that we've seen reports that the Broncos may want to make this decision by Monday or Tuesday of next week. So things can move quickly. And yeah, I think Peyton is one of those guys that will be involved in a lot of different searches.
The Lions, by the way, have interviewed 11 candidates for their GM opening. That's a lot. That's a lot, Eric.
It is a lot.
You mentioned Champ Kelly there, Eric. Let's talk about him for a little bit. Of course, he spent a long time here in Denver, working with John Elway's staff. I think that that would be a nice transition here from John Elway to Champ Kelly, somebody who's very familiar with the way that John likes to do things, the way that the Broncos do things. He is currently the assistant director of player personnel in Chicago.
Yeah, and Chip Kelly, I think, Phil, one of the alluring things about his candidacy is that he's done a lot of different things for this organization. In a previous life, I guess you could say, he was a collegiate football player and a semi-pro football player. He helped coach that team. He was an agent for a while, so he understands things from that sort of perspective. He worked in like football information technology for a little bit, so he's kind of brought some new age IT stuff to the football side of things in Chicago. And then, of course, he's helped with player evaluation. So he has a lot of different skill sets all married into one, very capable candidate. And I think something else that's interesting about Champ Kelly that we've heard is he really connects with the players on the roster. And I know that I was told that that's very unusual. And Phil, I think you would agree that a lot of times general managers kind of stay removed from the players on the roster just because it's difficult to form personal relationships when it's a business. But Dan Pompei of The Athletic, he did a story and he wrote about when Champ Kelly worked with Eddie Royal back in Denver in the 2000s and said there's a practice where Eddie Royal got into it with a teammate. He got really mad, ended up playing well the rest of that practice. And Champ Kelly, who worked in the front office, took him aside and said, hey, let's harness that anger. Let's use this. It was just a good example. And I think that if there's one thing the Broncos could use, it might be a candidate that can kind of connect with the roster, kind of narrow that gap between the front office, the coaching staff, the players. And so I think Champ Kelly would bring that in. And he just has a really inspirational story, Phil. He's really worked his way up from a tough early start to his life, and now a really good candidate.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, we know Champ Kelly from here in Denver, a little bit of an unusual way that he connects with people. Very personable. I mean, I got to know him in digital media. I mean, I would say that's unusual, for the director of pro scouting to have a relationship with someone in digital media. But, he did this Champ Camp. He continues to do the Champ Camp in areas that he has been very involved in the community, and you get to know him. I'm not sure if you'll ever meet a nicer guy who works in this business. You get to see him catch up a little bit at the combine and different events, throughout the off season. Obviously, he's got a relationship with Vic Fangio too from their time in Chicago. So he checks two boxes right off the bat there. Knows John Elway, knows Vic Fangio. Those are two big things here. And, you might say, okay, well, what's Chicago done since he's been there? What kind of big moves have they made? Just a reminder, Champ Kelly was in Denver, was the director of pro scouting when they had that massive offseason haul of guys like Aqib Talib, DeMarcus Ware, Emmanuel Sanders, and TJ Ward back in 2014. So that's the kind of guy who's scouting other pros around the NFL and obviously very familiar with Denver. I think that would be a little bit of a contrast to a guy like George Paton, who has been around for a long time, has been a GM candidate for a long time, whereas Champ Kelly is sort of this up-and-comer. He's a name that, maybe people consider him a rising star. He'd been reported to have interviewed for the GM spot in Carolina already. And so now obviously will be interviewing with the Broncos. That was confirmed by both Vic Fangio and Joe Ellis. So a little bit of a different candidate than George Paton just in terms of experience, but definitely somebody who could come in here right away and hit the ground running.
Yeah, and the Chicago teams, they've struggled to find the quarterback. Obviously, everyone knows what's happened with Mitchell Trubisky and Nick Foles, but they do have a talented team. They built the number one defense in the league a couple of years ago. They have made the playoffs 2 times in the last 3 years. So it's not like they're a slouch of an organization. But yeah, one of the things that Dan Pompei told me was that, yeah, this is normally you see head coaching and GM candidates come from Super Bowl organizations or teams that have been in the AFC or NFC championship. That's not what the Bears are. And so he thought that spoke even more highly of Champ Kelly, that he's getting this attention despite the teams, they're not on the level of the Chiefs necessarily. And so that's interesting. And then, like you mentioned, Phil, maybe a little bit more up and coming, but he has gone through the interview circuit before. And so it does feel like, whether in Denver or somewhere else, that he's probably reached his time to be a GM, which, maybe Phil is Champ Kelly a couple of years ago is maybe where a guy like Dave Ziegler is now.
Yeah. And with that, Eric, that was a nice transition. Let's talk about Dave Ziegler here. Obviously, seems like he might be due for an elevated role, even in New England, where he is now, because Nick Caserio, leaving there, had worked a long time alongside Bill Belichick, making roster decisions in New England. Caserio goes to the Houston Texans now. So you think maybe Dave Ziegler would be due for a promotion right where he is, but he will be reportedly interviewing with the Broncos here. And he would bring that pedigree, a New England type of pedigree. And he's also somebody who has worked here in Denver previously.
Yeah, another guy with Broncos connections, Phil. Ziegler's interesting. I think he's also viewed as like, he's an up-and-comer, where a year or two from now, you might really look at him as a guy that is being talked about as a potential GM. And that's not to say he cannot be a GM this year, but he was the assistant to Nick Caserio, who is now, of course, the recently hired GM in Houston. Caserio worked under Bill Belichick. And so you've kind of got an interesting setup there in New England, where, they've replaced some people over the last few years in the front office. Bill Belichick ultimately makes those personnel decisions. And so it's difficult to know exactly what, Dave Ziegler or Nick Caserio, what their roles are. But he's been the right-hand man for Caserio. And so I think that speaks to the fact that if teams believe Caserio is ready, they may well believe that Ziegler's ready as well. And to me, Phil, that's the kind of hire you make if you think, hey, he's a talent that, we can't avoid to let get away here. He is 43 years old. And I think what's interesting is a lot of these guys, Champ Kelly, a George Payton, these are younger guys in their early 40s. And so I think regardless of who they choose, an influx of youth, I think is a good thing and could bring some new energy to the front office.
Ziegler, very close relationship with Josh McDaniels. When Josh McDaniels was rumored to be going to Cleveland last offseason, it was reported that Ziegler was going to go along with him to Cleveland. Of course, that did not materialize. They both ended up staying in New England, but that
Indianapolis.
I think it was Cleveland where he was going to go. That was a couple of years ago that Josh McDaniels was going to Indianapolis, but he was rumored.
I think Ziegler was going to go with him at that point as well. But
really? Both of those?
I believe so.
Okay, so obviously very close relationship there with Josh McDaniels, one that dates back to when they were both here in Denver.
Yeah, of course. And I don't know if how much Broncos fans would like that. I'm kind of skeptical, Phil, that he'll leave New England. I mean, obviously he's on the list of candidates. He's agreed and, reportedly going to have an interview with the team. But given that there's an opening in New England, I think teams often try to turn to people, especially the Patriots, who are within the organization, know how things operate. So to me, I view him as a little bit more of a long shot, but we'll have to see.
Yeah. He was here for those first couple of seasons with Fox too. So he a guy like Chris Harris Jr. who came in, I think Ziegler had something to do with that selection. So obviously a bright mind, and somebody that the Broncos reportedly are going to take a look at here and just see if it's a good fit. And ultimately, I think that's what's going to be most important, Eric, is that it's just a good fit for a bit of a unique situation here coming in, working, with reporting to John Elway, working with Vic Fangio, but also at the same time having final roster say. So I think it's going to have to just be a good fit, ultimately, who the Broncos end up deciding here. Let's move on to our next candidate, Eric, and that's Terry Fontenot, Of course, the Saints have had a lot of success and is one of those guys that, like you mentioned earlier, a Super Bowl contender. That's where you tend to pick future GMs.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they're a team that has just found a lot of talent over the years. I mean, look at that offense, Phil. You've got Ryan Ramczyk at right tackle. You've got Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara. They signed Emmanuel Sanders in free agency. They've done a nice job of finding a guy like Taysom Hill off the waiver wire. A guy like Terry Fontenot is involved in the pro personnel side of things, so he likely has a hand in that sort of decision. So whenever you see success, Phil, you're going to want to get someone who's been around that. But I think the key whenever you're interviewing someone from a great team is distinguishing, and this has hurt some teams when they've hired New England coaches in the past, is how do you distinguish greatness as a team and an organization from the individual? And so I'm sure that's something the Broncos will try to parse through during the interview process.
And part of the other problem is that guys want to play with someone like Drew Brees, so you think about picking up someone like Emmanuel Sanders this last offseason. Well, when Drew Brees is a quarterback and Sean Payton is the head coach, a little bit easier to recruit players to come play in New Orleans. But obviously so much success down there in New Orleans. And it's because of the wealth of talent that is on the roster. And he has been linked, I think, to the Atlanta job. I believe that he's been rumored to have interviewed there. So that might be a fit for him there, but definitely somebody that the Broncos reportedly are taking a look at and could come in here and be the next GM. So,
yeah, and he has some experience interviewing before. Interviewed with the Jets last year, and I do think it's a good sign from him. A guy like Mickey Loomis, the Saints GM, has been a strong advocate for him, saying it's well earned. They've done a fabulous job here, and that's what you ultimately want, Phil. Is you don't want to lose good employees, but if you're doing something right, they are going to leave, and hopefully the Broncos get back to that here soon.
And Eric, the final candidate that has been reported to be on the Broncos list is an internal candidate, Brian Stark. He is the director of college scouting right now for the Broncos, working under Matt Russell. John Elway knows the entire staff here in Denver. Somebody that could just get elevated into this role and hit the ground running.
Yeah, he knows exactly what the Broncos want to do because he's been here. He would work well with John Elway, would work well with Vic Fangio. I think that would probably mean keeping a lot of the same people in the front office that currently work there. Obviously, John Elway has said he'll advocate for those people, but it's ultimately up to the new GM. He's taken on an increased role in recent years, has been promoted. I think most people probably wouldn't notice, but to us, Phil, it's apparent that last year at the draft press conference, or I guess not last year because
2 years ago,
last non-COVID year, Brian Stark was down there sitting alongside John Elway and Vic Fangio, which was kind of a departure. It was kind of an interesting thing to see. So it's clear how valued he is in the department. We know the Broncos have drafted well the last couple of years with Pro Bowlers and Cortland Sutton and Bradley Chubb and Phillip Lindsay. He's been there when they found a guy like Justin Simmons. So yeah, another good internal candidate. And I think that's what maybe the choice you go if you say, hey, we're on the right path, or we want to continue to do exactly what we're doing. We want to continue to keep the same strategies. Then maybe a guy like Brian Stark makes sense.
Yeah, that would be against the narrative of let's try and bring in some fresh eyes. That would be just a little bit of a departure from that sort of thought process here, but definitely somebody who is well trusted within the organization, has done a good job here the last couple of years as the director of college scouting. Maybe not the kind of person who is on a lot of people's radar right now around the NFL, but I think just to have an opportunity to interview for this spot tells you what the Broncos think of him. And I agree with you, Eric, that it would send a message of, we feel like we're heading in a direction that is positive. Let's try and stay on that direction. So I think that's what that would signify there with Brian Stark. So
And we don't know, Phil, what the front office will end up looking like, but I think that there's a chance that any new GM could bring in some new people and keep some existing front office employees in Denver. So, it's not necessarily out of the question that Brian Stark could remain with the team, even if somebody else is hired as GM. And, given Stark's skill set and his ability to find college players, wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing at all.
No, no, definitely somebody. I think that if he does not end up getting the GM job, they would want to try and have stick around. And it's similar to like when Vic Fangio came in as the head coach. He kept a lot of the staff that had been in place in terms of assistant coaches and that type of thing. Vance did that before, so there's a lot of Gary Kubiak holdovers coaching positions for the Broncos. So I sort of think about that in a similar way.
Yeah. And, I think we've got kind of two tiers here, if you will. You've got like three guys who are assistant GMs in Champ Kelly, Peyton, and Fontenot. And then you've got a couple more guys in Ziegler and Stark that are like a level below assistant GM. And so, you know, for those people looking for a comparison point, maybe like a Kelly or a Fontenot or a Peyton, that's kind of like the equivalent of the job Matt Russell had when he was in Denver. And obviously he's going to retire. He declined the chance to interview for the GM job, wants to spend time with family, but that's like a step away from GM. Whereas like the people like Ziegler, Stark, they're two steps removed. And so, Phil, I think you're taking a risk here either way. It is interesting to me that um, no one that the Broncos are interviewing is a former GM. So anyone who comes in is going to be a first-time GM. You're working with a head coach who now has 2 years of experience, but was a first-time head coach. So to me, that's interesting that, in some ways that in and of itself is fresh eyes, fresh ideas. So we'll just have to see how that goes. But maybe that's a way to kind of handicap the race a little bit, that you look at who is one step away from being a GM, who's 2 steps away. And, we'll just have to see. But what do you think of that idea that they're right now, at least, only interviewing guys who would be first-time GMs, as opposed to looking at a guy like a Thomas Dimitroff or a John Dorsey who have held those roles before?
Yeah, and Scott Pioli, another name that's available and making the interview rounds here. I do think that that's interesting, Eric. I do think that maybe the role of GM maybe is starting to change a little bit compared to the way it was maybe 20 years ago. I think that before you thought of a GM as, sort of like the president, then you thought GM and then coach. There was sort of this structural process, this structure here of a hierarchy. But now, so much talk about, okay, this guy's going to have to come in and work closely with Vic Fangio. That kind of a thought process on, okay, this is more of a partnership. We need to be on the same page about the vision that the team is going in. We need to find players that fit this particular style of football, and we need everything to mesh. And I do think that maybe a younger guy, an up-and-comer guy, a guy who's been an assistant GM, might fit that new role a little bit better than somebody who has done it one way for a long time and says, okay, I sort of set in my ways. This is how I want to come in and run things. Maybe a younger guy, I'm just speculating here. I mean, I have no idea what these guys, what their vision is, what they're going to be asked in the interviews. The only thing I have to go off of is what Vic Fangio told me, and he said that he wants a talent evaluator. So I do think that that's going to be important, somebody who's spent a lot of time evaluating talent. But I also think that in today's NFL, the GM also sort of has to be like a great communicator, almost like sort of like a great manager of different people. They've got scouts all across the country doing all sorts of different things. They've got to manage the roster. They got to work with coaches. I mean, you got to be a good communicator. And so I think that that's also a big priority for the Broncos.
Yeah, I think in talking to some people who have covered these candidates more closely, a lot of them do sound like that type of guy where they can manage effectively. You hear, like you mentioned, Phil, Champ Kelly, just extremely kind, a great communicator, gets along with everybody. Somebody like George Payton, who I've been told everybody respects, that you won't hear a bad word about. Terry Fontenot, who's in charge of a process of finding, guys out on the waiver wire that's important. And, Champ Kelly organizing the top 100 draft prospects for the Bears. Those are important things. And I think when you singularly own that and you say, this is my process, this is what I'm in charge of, that gives you something tangible to bring into an interview and say, hey, I haven't held the GM role and there's going to be some challenges, but I've done these things that show I can do it. And I think, Phil, the other thing that hiring a young candidate does is it provides some staying power. And obviously, we hope that Vic Fangio, we hope the new GM finds success, that the Broncos are in the playoffs every year. But Vic Fangio is going to be 62 years old, I believe. At some point, whether he says I'm going to coach for 5 more years or 7 more years or 10 more years or whatever, you look and you say, he's not going to do it forever. If you hire a GM who's 42, there's a chance they could be in that role for a very long time. And, I get that in the pros, it's a little bit different, and there are very few people that stick at a job for 10 to 15 years, but it is possible. I just think having some new ideas, maybe a younger approach to analytics or whatever it may be, could be valuable for the Broncos. And so we'll just have to see how that plays out. But I like getting the energy, somebody that can connect with the team, be on the same page with Vic. And like you mentioned, Phil, just share a vision and stick to that vision. Because I think where the Broncos have gotten lost in the last couple of years is where, in 2017, you say, hey, we're going to sign, or excuse me, 2018, we're going to sign Case Keenum to fix this instantly, or we're going to get Joe Flacco to fix this instantly. And I think having somebody with a plan that, maybe that doesn't mean you never go after a big trade or you never make a splash move, but it has to fit your vision. I think that's an important thing.
Yeah, obviously selling a vision to the committee that's going to hire this GM is going to be crucial, no matter who it is. I mean, the Broncos are a team that's in a position here where it's teetering. They could develop and really take a big jump next season and really become the team I think that most fans hope that they realize their potential, or they could be a team that goes out and gets a couple of big time free agents and goes in that direction. So there's this is going to be a big off season for the Broncos, and we'll get into that a little bit later here, just on what the number one priority is going to be. But selling that vision to Joe Ellis, to John Elway, that's going to be crucial. You've got to have an idea of how you want to be able to do things. And I agree, Eric, I think that if you have a younger guy too, one nice thing that is going to be in position for him is having John still be involved somewhat. Obviously the final roster decisions, final say about big things is going to come down to the GM, but at least you'll have that sounding board for somebody who's done it for a long time and just say, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Somebody to listen and have in your corner, I think, is a big deal. And so the Broncos are in maybe a unique position where they can afford to go out and get a young guy and not just say, okay, good luck, you're on your own. They do have some sage wisdom in their corner. So, Eric, with that, let's get to another sage wisdom kind of guy in the media. That's, of course, NBC Sports' Peter King. Had a chance to catch up with him and talk to him about where the Broncos are in this GM search and what he thinks of this Broncos position in terms of the vacancies in the NFL. Well, Peter, there's never a dull moment in Denver, always doing something as they head into the offseason. This time it's a GM search. Peter, what do you think makes this job attractive to some of the top candidates out there?
Well, first of all, Phil, I think I would look at having John Elway look over your shoulder as more of a plus than an annoying minus. I was just telling somebody this week that the thing I would do if I were a GM candidate is I would go into an interview and I would say to John Elway, Joe Ellis, whoever's involved, Vic Fangio, whoever is in the interview, and I would say, here's the way I would like to do this. Yes, I would like to have final say, on personnel. I think you have to in this position, or else you're just neutered. But I would like to make one other request, and that request is I want you to take the 15 quarterbacks in this draft and the 8 quarterbacks who are going to come loose, Cam Newton, maybe Phillip Rivers, whoever else. I want you to do a deep dive into all 20 available quarterbacks, and let's make a decision together whether any of those are better options than going with Drew Lock and a clear backup in 2021. In other words, do we want to bring in a legitimate challenger for Drew Lock in training camp and in this offseason? Or do we want to give him one more year to confirm some of the promise that we've seen in him? And certainly there have been some excellent moments over the last, I guess you'd say 13 months, with Drew Lock. There haven't been enough of them, but there have been some excellent moments. So that would be my first and overwhelming desire. I would want to have control, but I'd want to have John Elway do the quarterbacks. And again, Phil, a lot of people are going to hear that and they're going to say, well, geez, Elway's the one who brought us. Elway's great. We love him. He's a legend. But Elway's the one who brought us Brock Osweiler. And Elway's the one who said, hey, Trevor Siemian's okay, and all this stuff. Every year you have to try to win with the resources that you have on the table that year. He has been in position to take some quarterbacks, don't get me wrong. But I think that each year, when you look at the year individually, you can understand why he did what he did. And I would not want to throw out all of that institutional knowledge and say, hey, John, you just sit in the back and wait for the cameras on draft day.
Peter, I wanted to just touch on a couple of guys that the Broncos have been linked to, reportedly going to be interviewing here. One is George Paton from Minnesota. What do you think about a guy like George, and would he be a good fit for the Broncos?
George Paton would be a good fit anywhere because he's a totally egoless worker bee who has been very close to several jobs in the last few years. I think he's ready to go. I think he would like to be a GM. If you ask Rick Spielman, the GM of the Vikings, you look at the Vikings over the last few years, they've had a lot of draft choices. And I think he would tell you that George Paton, not just in the middle and late rounds, but also in free agency, has been invaluable to him. So I'm bullish on George Paton.
And the one other guy I wanted to touch on was Champ Kelly. He's a guy who's been with the Broncos and then went over to Chicago and has been there the last several years. Obviously worked with Vic Fangio a little bit there, and also John Elway in Denver. Do you think that, he's a rising star maybe amongst the personnel departments?
I don't know him. I obviously know of him. I don't know him, but he's very, very well thought of. And the fact that if true, Phil, and I do not know if it's true, but if true, the fact that they seem to favor him over Adam Peters, who obviously he's with the 49ers and he's invaluable to John Lynch in San Francisco. And he's well known in Denver, obviously. But if they favor Kelly over Peters, I think that speaks volumes for the regard that they have. And again, I don't know how well Vic Fangio knows him, but clearly Vic Fangio, had he been in Chicago, would have given a positive review, because you're not going to want to bring in anybody who the head coach says, I was around him, wasn't that impressed.
Broncos fans, though, clamoring for a guy like Peyton Manning to come back. Peyton maybe better than anybody else in the media. Do you think that he would ever be interested in a role like this, or do you think he's holding out for a media job?
I do know Peyton, but I've never once had a conversation with him where I said to him, ownership, GM, number one analyst for a network, what job do you want? So I don't know. I do know that Peyton has really enjoyed his, doing this series the last 2 years, the Peyton's Places series, and he's very good at it. And I would be surprised if he threw his hat in the ring with one of these networks if he didn't get a primo job for huge money a year. On the other hand, I have talked to him about his love of living in Denver and his love of having a fairly normal life. I think he likes to be carpool dad. I think he likes to go to the games of my kids' dad. And I know somebody who knows him much better than I do told me the last go round, it wasn't this past year, I think it was 2 years ago, when I think he was seriously considering a television job, especially like a Monday night job where they would, ESPN would give anything to have Peyton Manning. But I think the way Peyton would do this job would be so limiting to Peyton Manning, the dad, that it would be hard for him because, Phil, that he is a nut job about preparation and about doing the job the right way. So this job is interesting because Peyton could live at home, obviously, and he could do the job. But I just think that I think if to do the job the right way, he would be working like Joe Gibbs or Mike Shanahan or the crazy coaches who work the 15 and 16-hour days. I just don't sense that he wants to do that right now. But I could be wrong. I've not talked to him about it. I've not asked him about it. My gut feeling is he likes being a dad and somebody who is with his kids a lot during the week.
Well, I agree with you, Peter. Yeah, he would be all in. He'd be there in the early mornings when the trash men were coming to collect stuff. So the last one I have for you here, you mentioned number one priority is figuring out that quarterback position. Maybe priority number two might be a decision on Von Miller. The Broncos have a team option on him coming up here. Obviously missed all of last season with the injury. What do you think about his future here, maybe in Denver or elsewhere?
I think that there's a chance it's going to be linked to what happens to the salary cap. My gut feeling is that the Broncos really want to bring him back and once and for all see what happens when you have a healthy Bradley Chubb and Von Miller rushing the passer. Because at the end of the day, Phil, now, if you look at this division, okay, you have probably the greatest quarterback there is in Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City. Play him twice a year. You've got the best young quarterback, the best rookie quarterback to come in the league in a while, Justin Herbert with the Chargers. Play him twice a year. And you have, when healthy, when all the weapons are healthy, you have an extraordinarily explosive offense potentially in Las Vegas. You play them twice a year with a good quarterback who might not be as good as the other guys, but on a given day, he can light you up for 350 easy. So I guess the way I look at it is, when you make that decision, you have to make it with keeping in mind that basically 40% of your schedule or whatever it is automatically against three offenses that if you don't disrupt their quarterback, you're going to have to score 35 to win. And you don't want to be in position to have to do that. And I love the Vic Fangio defense because basically it's a unique defense and it's hard to prepare for and all that. But if you don't have the great rush people in any defense, you're not going to have a great chance to win. And I guess, Phil, overall, what I would say is I want to find out where the cap is, and I want to find out whether Von Miller is willing to play ball salary-wise with me. Obviously, he can go somewhere else, assuming he's healthy in March and April, and play and be impactful. So there will be interest in him. But I would probably want to try to keep him if he's going to be healthy. But I don't know that I want to keep him unless he plays ball with us on the salary cap.
Peter, thank you so much for your time. Always really appreciate your insight.
Okay, Phil, you have a good day.
My thanks to Peter King for taking some time to chat here on the Neutral Zone. Pretty good get, huh, Eric?
That's nice.
That's pretty good. Pretty good. Always enjoy chatting with Peter King. So thank you very much for that, Eric. For that. God, what am I trying to say, Eric? What am I trying to say? I'm flustered.
You just want to thank me all the time.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm trying to do. What I was trying to do was transition, Eric, and talk a little bit about what do you think the number one priority for whoever ends up being the next general manager of the Denver Broncos is.
This is difficult because I think you could go a couple of different ways. You could say, sign Justin Simmons, figure out Von Miller's contract, decide whether you want to keep Philip Lindsay, decide who your quarterback is.
I'm looking for the number one.
I'm going to go more big picture, Phil. I think you've got to decide, is this team, and we talked about this on Monday or Tuesday, is this team actually close to competing with the Kansas City Chiefs? And if they are, and I think you can make a very strong argument that they are, that they have the pieces on offense, that they can reload on defense, that Drew Lock, when he's playing well, is good enough to compete. Certainly we saw that in Arrowhead. If you decide that they are, you take an approach, you take a vision, you have a plan where you're aggressive, and you go out and you sign some big name free agents. Maybe you try to just plug a couple final holes in the draft and you go after it. If you don't think you're close, if you say, hey, even if we weren't injured last year, we were still going to be an 8-win team, then you've got to decide, hey, do we need to, you're not going to get rid of guys like Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy and Noah Fant and Bradley Chubb, but do we need to, let Vaughn go? Do we need to decide if it's worth extending Justin Simmons? Do we need to, see if we can find a young quarterback in the draft? All the decisions that may get the headlines, Phil, I think stem from that initial decision of evaluating the roster honestly and saying, where do we stand? And once you make that decision, I think a lot of them fall into place, because if you decide, hey, we're not that close, maybe the Vaughn situation is handled differently, or the Justin situation is handled differently, or the Drew situation is handled differently. But that decision has to be made first. There has to be an honest and open evaluation of where you stand.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of a 10,000, 50,000 foot level decision, that's sort of overarching the whole organization.
But we talk about vision, and, I think the vision has to be decided first before you make any, because when this new general manager comes in, the first press conference, Phil, is going to be like, what's your plan? How do you anticipate working with Vic? But in that same press conference, the questions are going to be, what's Von Miller's future like? What's Justin Simmons' future like? What's Drew Lock's future like? What's Philip Lindsay's future like? And all those things are important, but they're not, each of those is not made in a vacuum. You hope they're made with that vision in mind of where the team is going and what's the best way to get the team back to the playoffs or back to division contention. And so that's why, I'm taking kind of a 50,000 foot look at it instead of, obviously finding the quarterback is the most important thing, but I'm looking at it a little bit more high level.
So you're, like I said, what was the biggest priority? And you said all the priorities, and you're like, all of the priorities are.
I said deciding, is this team ready to compete for a division title or close? And if you're not, then maybe you evaluate, how do we get there? Because the worst thing you can do, Phil, and the Broncos have they've kind of been there. Even in this stretch where we've been not so great and have not made the playoffs, Broncos have never had 1 win or 2 wins or 3 wins or enough to like really make a franchise altering pick. They've kind of been stuck in that middle ground.
Yes, I think that when they picked number 5 overall, that was probably a moment where they were hoping to get a franchise altering type of pick, and we'll see what Bradley Chubb ends up being here for the Broncos. But to me, I think the answer to that vision is Drew Lock. If you think that Drew Lock is going to be the guy and is going to put this team in the best position to win games in the short term and the long term, because let's face it, Eric, when you hit year 3 as the guy here in Denver, you got to win games now. There's no longer is it, oh, I'm still developing and we're going to get these problems fixed. The problems need to get fixed right now. And I think that if this new GM comes in and says, I believe in Drew, I scouted Drew, or we had conversations wherever we were prior. We like Drew Lock. If that person comes in with that vision and makes that decision, that's going to tell you a lot about where the direction of the Broncos are going here. If that person doesn't believe in Drew Lock, but thinks that the rest of the roster is ready to win right now, they could easily bring back Justin, bring back Vaughn, make a big move and bring in a veteran and go for it right now. Or they're going to say this team as a whole is not really close. Let's draft a young quarterback. Let's have him develop. And maybe 3-4 years from now, this team will be close. So I think that the answer to
Did
your
you just
question,
repeat what I said or no?
But I think specifically the answer to your question is the quarterback position. So like, instead of saying, oh, it's all these different other guys, I'm telling you, deciding what the vision is for the quarterback will answer all other questions. So that's got to be the biggest priority. And the interesting thing is John Elway and Vic Fangio, guys who picked Drew Lock to come in here, are going to be hiring this next GM. So sort of an interesting situation where you're saying, okay, well, what do you think of the job we've been doing here? Hard to walk into that situation and say, well, I don't think this is going in the right direction here. You guys need to change this. You need to do this. A tough sell, but I think that you have to be honest in the interview process. And I think that John Elway and Vic Fangio are big enough to respect the opinions there, but that's got to be sort of an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are part of the tough conversations you have when you're interviewing for one of 32 of the most important jobs in professional sports. I mean, you can't be afraid to.
But in some of these other situations, you're not being inserted into something where it's already been decided. In a lot of these situations, it's like the owner who's hiring this GM, and then the GM's going to come in and do what they want. This guy's already got a head coach in place, already has John Elway there, already has this group that's going to be deciding whether or not this person gets hired.
I mean, we just saw in Washington where they spent the 15th overall pick on Dwayne Haskins, and then the next year brought in Ron Rivera. They hired Jason Wright as the president. They bring in different leadership. Dan Snyder is the one who said, draft Dwayne Haskins. And Ron Rivera and Jason Wright came in there and were willing to say to the owner of the football team, not to the GM or the coach, hey, we want to release this guy.
Yeah.
Well, but Ron Rivera has his vision. He stuck to his vision. If a GM candidate comes into the Broncos and doesn't think that Drew Lock is the guy and pretends like he is for the sake of getting along with Vic Fangio or in John Elway, you're setting yourself up for failure. You're setting Vic Fangio up for failure. You're setting Drew Lock up for failure. You're setting the team up for failure. I mean, it just doesn't work. And so, yeah, it might be difficult to have that conversation. I will say you at least have the final say here. There are some teams that hire a GM. Carolina, for example, is going to hire a general manager. It doesn't have say over personnel. So to me, that's a harder sell. Why would you want to go there and have your ideas and then not be able to make the final decision? That's more difficult.
I agree. I agree with that. I agree with all of that. I'm just saying that's an interesting. That's got to be difficult to come in and say, I have a different vision than you guys.
But I think the Broncos recognize that something is not working. Otherwise, they would not have done this. I think to listen to Joe Ellis talk about John's decision to step down or to step into an elevated role, but step out of the day-to-day responsibilities, it's clear they know something isn't working. If things were all sunshine and daisies, the Broncos would be 12-4, 13-3 every year and be in the playoffs and not be having this conversation. So I think they realize that they need to have some tough conversations, evaluate everything. I'm sure Vic Fangio doesn't want to consider giving up play calling duties, but he said he's going to look at that along with everything else. And I will say, Phil, we like Drew. We like his confidence. We like his talent. He's shown flashes. I think Vic Fangio would put you at quarterback, Phil, if it meant it gave the Broncos the best chance to go 12-4 and win the division. So whatever the evaluation is, that's what they're going to follow. You can't have loyalty here to an old idea or an old player, or whoever it might be, just for the sake of doing it so that you don't hurt anybody's feelings. That's how you end up in trouble. And people give Bill Belichick a hard time because he cuts people a year early and he's kind of considered like cold and ruthless, but there's a reason that they're in contention.
Not in the playoffs this year.
Okay. Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
And what, they won 8 games. I mean, they, for not having a quarterback that played well, they still did better than the Broncos. So I think there is something to that method.
Of course, you cannot make emotional decisions and hope to contend and hope to be relevant every year. You've got to make the best decisions for the Broncos. So whatever that is, I hope that the new GM can come in, speak freely, but it is an interesting situation where you're telling people, I think that the Broncos should go in a different direction here moving forward. And that's my vision as the next GM. That is an interesting situation. But I agree with you that I do think that the Broncos as an organization are big enough to recognize that things haven't been up to the standard the last couple of years. And it's time to get some differing perspectives maybe on how to proceed here moving forward. Not to say that the next GM is going to shake things up. Just having fresh eyes maybe, or a different thought process, or maybe a new voice in the room could be beneficial if they go with one of the outside candidates, Eric. So
just to your New England point, because you like to take a little shot there.
Yeah.
This was New England's worst year in like 20 years. The Jets have 7 seasons.
Who was there for all of those years?
The guy who's struggled to make a wild card berth in Tampa.
Oh my goodness gracious. You're just going to blast Tom Brady like that?
We got a 50-year-old Drew
goodness.
Brees out there with broken ribs who's playing better than Tom Brady. I don't want to hear
Oh my goodness.
The Jets have won more than 7 games like twice in the last decade. New England gets 7 wins and the sky is falling.
Of course, Bill Belichick is a genius, the best head coach that's ever led in the National Football League. He is the guy. He's created the system that all these other organizations have tried to model it after. Of course, he's a genius. But I will say, heading into this year, there was a lot of thought, okay, now that Brady and Belichick have gone their different directions, their different ways, who is going to have the better season, Brady or Belichick? And it turns out that Tom Brady did. So that is a fact. So
it is a fact. New England also had like 10 of their best players opt out.
Yes. But
we'll see what happens next year when Belichick drafts Justin Fields or trades Sam Darnold and they're back in the AFC Championship. We'll see what happens.
Yes, they would be. He's obviously the greatest coach that's ever lived. So there's no debating.
Matt Stafford would go to New England and your heart would just crack into a million pieces.
Exactly. I'd be like when.
How do you feel today as everyone has jumped off the Matt Stafford bandwagon? I mean, people who have been tweeting at me with Matt Stafford to Denver. I think their names
now they
are
want
Deshaun
Watson
to Denver. Yeah.
There's no way that's happening.
It'd be very exciting though.
That would be exciting. Who would you give up, Eric? What would you have to do?
Probably 3 first-rounders and 3 second-rounders. I think you would have a conversation. So you're looking at the next time you drafted somebody, like Jerry Jeudy would be in year 8 of his career. Like
Yes, that
Gosh.
means that player who is going to be
Your
drafted
average
is in
roster age would
seventh
be
grade.
20. Yeah, your average roster age would be 36.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. But I would say if there was one franchise where that could happen, Houston would be that. And they've got a new general manager. Maybe they want to do their things their own
put
way.
it, Phil. Would you trade Paxton Lynch, Sylvester Williams, and Bradley Roby for Deshaun Watson?
That is not one way that I would look at it. I would not look at it because you just
those
named
those are three first-round picks.
I know that, but those weren't the best first-round picks.
But you imagine that if you get Deshaun Watson,
you're picking at the end of the first round. Yeah.
I mean, you can even say, would you trade Jerry Jeudy, Bradley Chubb, and Noah Fant for Deshaun Watson? That's an interesting.
Yes.
That's more of a. Well, what would you?
I don't know.
Or you don't want to go on the record.
I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to.
You're like,
I don't want to talk
next
about
topic.
That. Yeah, let's not talk about that. I haven't thought about it. I don't want to say something where
Paxton
I didn't
one.
think.
I'll go on record saying I'll do the Paxton one.
Yeah, I do tend to think that Deshaun Watson is probably where would you put him right now? He's like maybe the 6th or 7th best quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah, I would say he's behind Mahomes, Rodgers, Russell Wilson,
Josh Allen.
Probably take Josh Allen. I think
at this point
that's then where you're in the maybe Andrew Luck if he unretires could be a nice option.
You're in that Von Miller camp where he thinks that's going to happen.
Is that what Von thinks?
I think so. Yeah, he told that to Kay Adams on one of those broadcasts, like one of those game.
Oh, he thinks Andrew Luck is coming back.
Yes,
that would be tremendous.
Yeah. So, Eric, with that, let's get
five
to
first-round picks for that guy.
You do the Ricky Williams trade, huh?
Exactly.
Yeah. Eric, let's get to our picks for this weekend's games. Of course, it'd be nice if the Broncos were playing in the wild card here this weekend, but alas, we've got 6 games to pick. It's going to be.
You handle 6?
I think
that's a lot, Phil.
I can handle it. So we'll just take some picks here straight up. No spread, nothing like that. But
That's soft, but okay.
That is soft. Okay.
You're gonna tell me
I'm just gonna pick the winner here. Who you like here? Indianapolis at Buffalo.
I think Buffalo. They're playing really well.
Yes, they are. They're playing very, very, very well. The last time they lost a game, let's see, when was this? Against the Cardinals here, Eric. That was a long time ago. Yeah, exactly. That was November 15th, and they lost by 2 points on a Hail Mary. Yeah. And then
say your fern behind you hadn't even grown yet, but we know it's fake, so it looked exactly the same.
It was just germinating at that point, Eric.
Yeah, exactly.
You like that word? You like that? Okay. Next game, I'm with you. I'm taking the Bills. Rams at Seattle.
It's a tough one because the Rams are they're hot and cold. When they play well, they play really well. And the Seahawks do struggle with them, but I think Seattle will win a close one.
And that's a division matchup. Anytime you see a divisional matchup in the playoffs, you're like,
throw the records out.
You throw it out. Normally, I would say, hey, that's in Seattle. That's a huge game, but no fans there. So
still in Seattle.
It's still in Seattle, but it's not like you're walking into the Thunderdome.
Right.
You're not walking into a ruckus environment. I'll still take Seattle. Ruckus.
Ruckus is different.
Rutgers?
You're making me go very close to smug, Phil, and the listeners are not going to like
it. I'm trying to get you there. I'll also take Russell Wilson. I just like and Goff, obviously some injury problems there, so I'm going to go with Russell Wilson in this one.
You're out on John Wolford, huh?
I'm assuming you're taking Washington over Tampa Bay, so I'll just go ahead and put that down. Oh, is that not true?
I think the Buccaneers have benefited here from getting an easy matchup. I think they'll win, but they ain't going to the Super Bowl. Phil.
You're taking Tom Brady in this matchup.
Yeah, this year he'll win a wild card game. It'll be a nice change of pace.
I believe Adam Schefter tweeted that this is the first time in Tom Brady's career that he's playing for a wild card team. Ever.
That's unbelievable.
That is unbelievable. Yes, it is.
Thanks, Bill Belichick. Appreciate you.
I will also take Tampa Bay, especially since Chase Young egged on Tom Brady a little bit. I'm looking forward to those two going at it. So that wraps up Saturday, Eric. On Sunday, Baltimore at Tennessee.
I think Baltimore is going to run all over them. They just ran for 400 yards the other day, Phil.
Yes, I think that Baltimore played in a very tough division this year. 3 of the 4 teams made the playoffs in that AFC North. I think that Baltimore is better than their record suggests, and I'm a little
Derek Wolfe.
They got Woofy. I'm a little hesitant because I'm not sure what to expect from Tennessee. Like, Tennessee can beat anybody, but also they could go to Green Bay and get blasted. So, like, I feel like you're just not sure.
You mean in the regular season?
Well, they had a nice playoff run.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Tennessee's not going to Green Bay in the playoffs.
That just happened the other week there where they got blasted on Sunday Night Football.
That's true.
That's why I said that. So, like, I wouldn't expect a playoff team to just get run out of the stadium that way, but that's what happened.
They also almost lost to Houston last week, so.
Yeah. So I
Those are a
will
little
take
tough.
I'll also take Lamar Jackson and company there too. So we're 4 for 4 on the same page here, Eric. I don't like that. I don't like it.
There's not a lot of competitive games, I don't think, this weekend.
I think
it'll
some
get a little spicy.
Yeah, but I think you might be in for some surprises. There's always a couple surprises on Wild Card Weekend, Eric.
Okay.
Chicago at New Orleans.
That going to be one of those surprises?
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. I think the Saints probably blast them.
With the Saints, it might come down to like a late call, a pass interference or something. And
yeah, there's no team, which it frustrates me because of Tampa. Like, I don't think there's like a really dominant team in the NFC.
You don't think that the Packers or Saints are dominant?
Oh, sorry. The Packers. I'm looking at Wild Card Weekend team. Yeah, the Packers are really good. I don't think there's like a real challenger to the Packers. Whereas I think
the Saints are AFC, really good. Alvin Kamara scored 6 touchdowns in one game.
Every time the Saints are really good, they go to the playoffs and like they just forget how to play football.
Really? What was it? Didn't they beat some team in the Super Bowl?
Yeah, we're talking 10 years ago. You're going back to your 60s.
The same head coach and quarterback are still playing for that organization. So
yeah, the quarterback. It's kind of a problem, huh?
Okay, so we'll both take the Saints. I think that the Saints are really good. So this might be the best game of the weekend, Eric. Then Cleveland at Pittsburgh. You don't think so?
This might be the worst game of the weekend.
Cleveland at Pittsburgh. I'm saying.
Yeah. Cleveland doesn't have a head coach and like 10 of its players.
Yeah, but they just beat the Steelers a week ago.
With Mason Rudolph at quarterback.
Yeah.
I mean, this could get ugly, I think.
Really?
This is going to challenge your take, Phil, that head coaches don't matter. And they're like, let's just pick a random guy on the sideline and let him call plays. I mean, how cursed must you feel if you're Cleveland? You haven't made the playoffs in 2 decades. You almost screwed up against the Steelers backup quarterback. You sneak into the playoffs, you get in, you feel great, and then your play caller tests positive for COVID and can't coach the game. It's like a little rain cloud just follows that team around. It's very sad. You
feel bad for them?
I would have cheered for Cleveland. I still probably will. I would like to see Cleveland win a playoff game. I don't want them to win the Super Bowl necessarily, but
I do think that Pittsburgh. I do think Pittsburgh will win.
Phil?
Who do I want to win the whole thing?
Yeah,
that's an interesting question because I tend to hate all other teams. No, I'm just kidding. I think that it would be.
Or give me like your preferred Super Bowl matchup or something. If you can't give me one team,
if you could just pick 2 teams to play each other, I would love to see Buffalo and New Orleans play each other in the Super Bowl.
You love Drew Brees, huh?
I feel like that team has been like sort of cursed a little bit, just in terms of like they're always really good, but something weird happens and then they lose. Like the Rams,
like a Bounty Gate type situation.
I didn't like that, Eric, and so I tend to, maybe that's why they've been cursed. But you're talking about the Minnesota Miracle. Okay, boom, their season's over.
Great play, Case Keenum.
You're talking about the no call on the pass interference. Boom, your season's over. I tend to think that the last maybe like 5 years, the Saints have been Super Bowl contenders and they haven't even played in the game. So
you know what happens when like one of those terrible things happens to the Chiefs? Patrick Mahomes says, "Let's run wasp," and then they just get a 40-yard completion on third down and they win.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
So you want the Chiefs? You want the Chiefs to win? Is that what you're saying?
No. I would love to see the Buffalo Bills win the Super Bowl. I think that would be tremendous.
That would be exciting. But also, I do think maybe this is the end for Drew Brees. And so I tend to get a little sentimental and I tend to think, okay, let's just let him go out on top. Maybe,
It might be the end for Tom Brady when Chase Young snaps him in half.
Gosh, you're a hater, aren't you? You're a hater.
Well, I think, you might get accused in the comments of being a Tom Brady apologizer, a lover. I mean, big fan of Tom Brady over here with the fake fern.
Don't listen to him. You're a real fern. It would be exciting though, because I do think for Bills Mafia, the fans there in Western New York, they're crazy about football. That would be pretty exciting for them. It would suck if they made it to the Super Bowl and lost, though.
That's true.
That would suck for them. Yeah. So how about, Eric, how many years in a row has it now been that the team that lost in the Super Bowl did not make the playoffs? It's been quite a bit. I'm trying to think.
That's true.
Yeah. The other thing that's encouraging on the flip side of that is that there's
what? I'm sure the Patriots made it back to the playoffs after losing the Super Bowl to the Eagles.
Oh yeah, other than the Patriots.
It's been 2 years. Crazy. That's wild.
Other than the Patriots, normally the team that loses a Super Bowl, see you later. Although the Broncos did that after they lost.
Other than the Broncos, yeah. So it's kind of interesting.
Huh. Maybe I need to go back and look at that before I start just bringing it up.
Yeah.
I was going to say, before you so rudely interrupted me, Eric, I was going to say there's several teams that made the playoffs this year that did not last year, which is encouraging for the Broncos.
We've been saying that for a few years now, huh?
Who's that? Cleveland, Chicago, Indianapolis, your beloved Colts, the Buccaneers, Washington.
Yeah.
It's possible, the Rams. So all it takes is 1 year. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I will say there's always a team that goes worst to first in a division. In the last few years, as bad as it's been, the Broncos have not been worst, I don't think, except for maybe when they had the 5th overall pick. They're back in 4th place now. So maybe
only 2 years ago?
They missed the playoffs, 5 years in a row? There's been some time.
Eric, with that, we better wrap up this show. You got any shout outs?
Nope, Phil, I'm just going to sit here quietly. You can handle this portion of the show.
You don't have any shout outs?
Yeah.
Wow, you're going to do that to Liz Manis?
I'll shout out to Liz Manis. Murray.
Got it. Are you grumpy over there?
No, I've been trying very much to be kind to you, and maybe that wasn't your New Year's resolution.
Was that your New Year's resolution to be nice?
Yeah, were you not listening at the beginning of the show?
I didn't know you made a resolution, Eric. I think you just said you were going to try and be nice.
No, I said a fan wrote in and said that should be my New Year's resolution.
Oh, God. Oh, I see. But you didn't adopt it.
Hopefully the people listening to the podcast pay more attention to the person who's part of the podcast.
Well, when you tend to go on and on and on, I usually zone out a little bit and think
We've
about
got to
something
have some
else.
sort of quality information that is true and provides some value.
So you're going to say shout out to the fan who sent that in.
Yeah.
Eric, and what was their name? Who sent that email in?
I'm pretty sure it's Jeff Flanagan.
Just throw out a name.
When in doubt,
Okay.
assume it's Jeff Flanagan.
Got it. Our
We
good
appreciate
friend,
you, Jeff.
Yes, exactly. We'll get back to some voicemails here pretty soon. Hopefully after the Broncos make a GM hire.
Yeah.
Because until then, we've got really important things to talk about. Wow. All right. Well, we'll be back some point next week. Not exactly sure when. When do you think, Eric? Right after a GM makes a hire,
I wouldn't make
make
any
a GM
promises
hire.
you can't keep, though.
Yeah. Whenever the Broncos make a GM hire, we'll be back. If it's longer than next week, we'll be back before then. How do you like that?
Perfect.
Okay, so our thanks once again to NBC Sports' Peter King for taking some time to be a part of such a esteemed podcast such as the Neutral Zone. So our thanks to him. We talked about the 5 candidates that have been reportedly linked to the Broncos being interviewed. So we'll have to stay patient and see what happens here. But we went over the 5 of them and also what priority number 1 is. Well, I came up with priority number 1. Eric talked about like 6 or 7 different priorities. So, and with that, we'll say goodbye for Eric Dalala. I am Phil Milani. You've been listening to
The Neutral Zone.
This is Bronco Batman, and you're listening to The Neutral Zone.